there, it's Amanda here from Lolli Lulu Crafts, and today we are making an Altenew card using this fabulous older set from them, stamp set from them called Beautiful Day. And I'm actually just going to be using the outline image, and we're going to be watercolouring it using the Zig real brush markers. And as you can see, I've literally just got 4 colours here that I'm going to be using, so it's going to be a real simple watercolour. So I hope that you will see that you can get some really nice effects without a lot of effort. So we're going to do a little bit of a technique today, just a little play on the imagery that we're going to be using, and it's really simple, but it's something that I'd seen in a number of different places that different people had done on different cards, different companies, stamp companies and things, and I really wanted to try it myself. So I can't give you kind of one direct person that inspired me, it's just something I'd seen generally. So I hope that you like this technique as well. I thought we'd have a go. So we're starting off using this Arches watercolour paper, and I've cut it 2 pieces to exactly the same size that is slightly bigger than the largest die that I'm going to use from this Sue Wilson shadow box collection. Now, as always, I will put a list of the products used, etc. And also for this, I'm going to put down some sizes and stuff all on the blog post. So definitely make sure you go across to there. So as you can see, that's going to be the biggest die that we're going to be using. The reason I'm using this shadow box one is because it's got the stitched effect on it, so I rather like that. And I've just drawn around the edge of that large one that we're going to be using. I'm then taking not the next one down, but the next one down from that, so we're missing one, and then going to the next size down, and I'm going to then put that into the middle, so it's got an equal gap where I drew the previous pencil line, and I'm drawing around that one. Now I only need to do this on one piece of card because we're using the stamp platform. If you're not using the stamp platform, to be honest, I think you might find this a little bit more fiddly to do, but you possibly could do it by drawing on both of them. But I really think it might be something that's almost not possible without a stamp platform, but I could be wrong, but I can't quite see how you could make it work perfectly. So the first thing I'm doing is on one piece I've just put my flower and some leaves in the corner, and I'm just stamping it using VersaFine. Now sometimes with watercolor card, even the smooth hot press ones, you have a still slight sort of texture to them, so you may have to stamp with the black, you know, go down again. So now we've swapped over and we're not touched our stamps, we've not moved them, but we've put the other piece of card in, which is the same size, so when we stamp it, the stamps are going to be in exactly the same position on the card, and that's really the key, and that's kind of why I said I'm not sure you can do this without a stamp platform. This piece of card I'm stamping using some Versamark, actually it's the Simon Says Stamp embossing ink, and you saw there, because of the sort of, even though it's the smooth watercolor card, it still seems to have a bit of a texture, so I did go down twice onto the same area. And you'll also notice that I obviously hadn't cleaned the stamps completely, and so when I stamped with the embossing ink, it slightly picked up and stamped a little bit of the previous black, so you had a slight colour, it wasn't completely crystal clear. I'm not too worried about that, that's not going to be a problem. So unless it's super dark, I wouldn't worry too much about if there's a slight little amount of the ink showing. I deliberately did it that way round because I wanted to see first the layout of my stamps. So if I started with the clear, which I also did clear embossing powder on here, then clearly I'm not going to see it clearly. So it's although it's a bit more of a nuisance because you will get some transfer of the black, it does make it easier to see what you're doing. The other thing I would say, a little tip, was that I sat while I was doing the stamping and embossing, my heat embossing tool was on and heating up, and what I found was, and I always find this, is that if it's really got up nice and hot, you don't get so much warping in your card. So you can see here I'm just doing exactly the same thing for laying it out. I put a mask over the flower, I put some extra leaves on, I did that on the black, I did that on the embossed area. I then added a sentiment from the other stamp set, I didn't actually need to put the sentiment in the middle of the black. So if you're doing that, you don't have to actually do that. Again, I just wanted to see that it was positioned okay, because again, with the clear, you can't really see. So if I stamped it and then thought, oh, that's really not a good place, then I had an opportunity to change it before I did it on the clear, which is the part that the sentiment's going to show on. So now we're getting to the actual watercolouring, and we're using, as I said at the beginning, these beautiful zig markers. These are actually markers. I say markers because they are technically markers, but they're actually real brushes. That's, I mean, why they call them real brush markers, I guess. And I use a little bit of the colour. So what I'm doing here is the lovely, I think it's a peony. I'm not very good with flowers, but anyway. And what I did is I put the pink up where the shadow would be. So the area here on this particular petal is where the petal is folded over. There's obviously a little bit that would be darker on that edge underneath, as it were, that would be darker. So I put the ink there, and then I've taken my brush and some water, and I started off by just putting a little bit of the colour onto my brush, and then going over to the furthest side and just getting a little blush of colour over to the other side. And then I went back to the area where the ink is mostly, so you can see better here. I've speeded it up now a little as well, and you can see I'm just dragging the ink across so that I get a little bit of pale pink, and then I'm go back in and just sort of scrub at that line where it where that sort of initial colour finishes, so that you get a more smooth transition, because you will find that unless you go absolutely instantly, it does start to dry, and so you will find you have to just give that a little scrub in there. You can see I'm really sort of just scrubbing that area just to get that blended through nicely, and you can see I'm just going methodically through the flower. I'm not really thinking about it as a flower. I'm just looking at each area and thinking, right, that bit would be behind there, so that would create that to be a bit darker. I'm not thinking about light source and all of that. I'm just looking at, here's a leaf, it's curled over, or a petal, it's curled over, therefore that bit would be darker. Let's colour that with the ink, and then use my brush to put the paler areas. Now you'll see here I just went over the edge. All I'm doing is taking a clean brush and putting the water onto it and pushing it back. I haven't done such a good job with that yet. I do go back later and finish that off a bit better, but you can see here where that sort of initial ink goes down. To start with, it looks like it's not going to sort of smooth out and blend out, but it does if you just get your brush in there and just scrub it. I wouldn't put a massive amount of water down either. So you want to go in, you can see I'm barely touching the ink itself to start with. I'm dragging that little bit of colour across so that you get the palest pink at the very edge, which would be the lightest part. And then I'm going in and back to the area where I put the ink and just scrubbing that line, as it were, with the brush, so that I get that blend between the dark area and the pale area. And we're just keeping doing that methodically, and you're starting off with a slightly wetter brush to get that pale ink, and then when you go back to do what I call the scrubbing part, which sounds terrible, that's a much drier brush, just to try and really just blend that out nicely. I don't want to be like saturating it and putting too much ink across to the area that I've deliberately tried to keep pale. So then we're just working my way through. So you can see I'm looking and thinking, right, that area will be darker, so let's just put that in. And then you can see here when I went straight onto that ink and then pulled it down, it blends through easily. You don't need to do the scrubbing, but because I wanted to deliberately keep it very pale on some of those outer petals, you can see these petals underneath are a little darker, so I'm able to go in there and put a little bit more ink. But because I want to keep the other ones quite pale, I wasn't going straight onto that ink. I was picking a little up but not getting too much in one go. Now I'm taking what's sort of the residue on my brush, and I'm going over those areas that were kind of folded over. They would be very pale. Then I'm taking the ink, and I'm going kind of in the center and following the shape of sort of the fold, because the center of the fold would be a little bit darker, it might be a little bit creased, but the very lip of the fold, did over part of the petal, is going to be pale. So you want to just get that in, and that's just a little detail, but it makes a difference to how it looks. And if you look at them when petals on the flowers in life, you'll see that it kind of has that effect. So then I just went back into the center, and now I've swapped to the second pink that I had. Now when you see this pink on its own, it's like super neon pink, like a real cerise neon-y colour, and you'll see I'm putting a very small amount on, but look, literally for this one I'm going straight onto that ink and I'm just pulling that out. I'm not going out onto my pale colour, I'm literally just pulling it out onto over the dark area just to get a little bit more depth, and then I'm going into that centre again just to get a little bit more depth in the centre to give the whole thing even more dimension. You could leave it if you wanted to at the single colour. I mean, if you've achieved that and you're really happy with it, leave it. You don't have to do this second colour. That was just a personal choice for me. I just wanted to give that extra bit of depth, but it really isn't necessary. You could see prior to me adding this, it still looked perfectly nice. There was nothing wrong with it, and you know, you could leave that easily, but I just wanted to add that extra bit of something, and I just liked the colour as well. I felt like it gave a bit of that real sort of, I don't know, there's just sort of a bit more zing that you can get. Some peonies are kind of really soft like the first kind of version, and some have that extra little bit of something. So I was just trying to, as I say, just add a little bit of something to it, and I think it turned out really well. I liked the colour, but it may be that it's not for you. You preferred it before I added that, and it's simpler obviously to only have to do one colour. I didn't wait, by the way, for the paper to dry. I wasn't adding that much water in the first place that it was a big deal for me to have to wait. It was probably, you know, if I started back in the middle, it was already dry. So then I just went back in again in the center, but with my first color, just to blend out a little bit more. Unfortunately my camera cut out, so you missed me putting the first layer of green down of the leaves, but I literally just did what I'm doing here with the dark color, but I went straight out to the edge. So I put the color in the center, and then I did what I did with the petals. I took the color very pale to the edge and then did it across all of my leaves. Then I went back with my second colour, but as you can see with my second colour, I'm not pulling it out all the way to the edge of the leaf, so I'm leaving that pale edge, and I'm just using that second colour to again add a little bit of depth. I think with the leaves personally, it did need the second colour. I think that it worked better with that extra bit of depth. I suspect if I hadn't have added the darker pink to the flower, I could have got away with a single colour of the leaves, but because of the balance, it didn't work when you did it. You know, if you did the dark on the flower, I think you need the dark on the leaves. I think if you did it only the one colour on the flower, you could easily get away with one colour on the leaves as well. So again, now we're going down to the leaves at the bottom, so you'll now see what I meant about how I did the leaves up the top with the first colour. So you can see I just put it in the centre there. I did a couple of leaves at a time because you're pretty quick with that, and you can see I almost just go to the edge of the leaf and my brush is just catching the colour, so it just pulls that pale colour. Now here this leaf was slightly turned, so I put the dark on the bottom part of the leaf and left the top part paler rather than how I did the others. And the same here with the darker colour as I did above, just kept it in the centre, and just almost the flicking motion that I was able to create with the brush of the actual marker was enough almost to get it blended. It just seemed to blend out really nicely. The greens seemed to work really well together, I suspect because I was going onto it quicker, so the leaf was already still a little damp from the first colour when I was putting the second colour on, so it had that ability to slightly blend itself, whereas obviously with the flower, by the time I got to the second colour, I did so much that it kind of had already dried. And you'll see here I'm just adding a little bit of the dark green into the centre. You can see it's not making it look green, and it was just a little dot, but it just, again, adding that extra bit of depth to the centre of the flowers. And again, I'm just going back over these because I just felt like, even though they had been done, I just felt it still needed a little something. It just didn't have the depth, so it was just adding a little bit more to that, and there it is done. So normally I would obviously put music on and show you, you know, the colouring that way, but I decided to talk through it this time just so to explain what I did. So now what we're doing is we're using those dies that we used to draw around, and for this mono one, the one we didn't colour, I'm using the large die, and I'm just cutting around it, just cutting the sort of, just to tidy it. Now you'll see obviously the pencil line is still there, that was there for guidance, so we need to erase that. It probably won't show, but just to be sure, I decided to erase it. So next we're taking the smaller of the two dies, so that was the one that we drew around in the center of the other piece, and then we've just erased that line. It doesn't actually matter where you position it on here, long as it's some, you know, roughly in the center, so you have it, so you have your sentiment where you want it to be, so that the center element, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is the piece that's going to count. The outside of the die is going to be thrown away, so you want the centerpiece to be where you want it to be, and there it is cut out. So doesn't that look pretty? It seems a shame to throw away the excess, but there it goes. So here is our black and white piece, and I'm just showing you roughly the size so you can see what the die was, and then I'm cutting the pink to 1/4 inch bigger than that. It ends up being kind of slightly odd dimensions, like sort of 1/8 and things, and the same with the card here, which I've made using my easy peasy card method. Now, as I said earlier, I'll put all the dimensions on the blog post, so you'll have all that information precisely. And also what I'll do is I'll link the video on how to make my easy peasy card, so that you can make it basically any size card you want, and it's really, really easy, especially if you don't have a piece of card that's big enough just to fold, I think is more the point, really. So I'm just using some wet glue here on the back of the glitter piece of cardstock, and as you saw, I just spread the excess out with my finger because I just put a little bit too much on, and then I'm popping that on the front of this pink cardstock, which happens to be Adorable Scoreable, so it is a coated cardstock, and so it is quite slippery, so it takes a little bit of time to set. So I just put it to one side for a little bit, and then I pop my black and white plain layer, as you can see, again using just the white wet glue, and then finally I've put my colour piece on using foam, but then on the back of that I add some wet glue as well, because we need to be able to have movement time for this. This bit is really important. I wanted it to have the height, but as you can see, what we're trying to do is basically line it up, so we know that it's going to centralize because of how we set up the dies. And so what we just want to do is make sure that we line up those lines and give that illusion that it's just continuing on and you just haven't coloured it in. Now maybe you could do that even by not popping that up onto foam if you wanted to really get that illusion going, or even alternatively, instead of doing a clear embossed on the floral piece, the coloured floral piece, you could have done it in black, so it was like even stronger, the stamped line continuing. I quite like a soft watercolor piece, and I wanted to see a really distinct contrast between the two areas and see how that worked. But you know, each to his own, and it may be that you would prefer it differently, and that's the whole point. I've seen it done in many different ways, and so I wanted to personally try it this way and see what I thought. Certainly in person I think it worked really well. I really liked it, and I think you'll see from the photographs even better than on here how it looks. So that's a really nice cue for me to say again, do please go on across to the blog post, because as I said before, I'll add in those informations about, you know, the colours used. I'll obviously, as best I can, link all the products used anyway. I'll put the sizes. I'll add that video for you for the easy peasy card. And of course, I would love it if while you're there, you could subscribe to my website so you get notifications every time I post. So that is it. That is the card finished. I hope you've enjoyed. I would love, as always, to hear what you think by leaving me a comment here or on my website. Also, if you did like it, I would be ever so grateful if you could thumbs up the video. It does help me because YouTube then know that you've liked the video, and that helps me get pushed up the list for all sorts of things that help me with YouTube. So that always helps me to be able to continue making you video content. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next week. Bye for now. Bye.